Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. Several more new movies opened this past weekend that ended on April 28th, 2024, and two of them earned enough revenue to be in this weekend's top 5 movies at the domestic box office. But in reality, this was another very lackluster weekend at the domestic box office overall, because the combined domestic earnings for the top 5 movies was only $42.2 million, which is $2.5 million less than the previous weekend's earnings of $44.7 million. And that was less than the $45 million domestic opening weekend box office that Ghostbusters Frozen Empire earned 5 weeks ago, and that movie is a flop. But before proceeding, I'd like to ask everyone to please like this video, please subscribe to this channel, and please press the bell to receive notifications. Thanks! This weekend's top 5 domestic box office recap will include 3 additional movies below the top 5, since I am tracking their overall box office earnings. Opening in the number 1 spot in this weekend's domestic box office was the MGM and Amazon Studios movie Challengers, which has a reported moderately high production budget of $55 million. The movie opened by earning $15 million domestically and $10 million internationally for a global gross opening weekend take of only $25 million. And given that $55 million production budget, when multiplied by 2.5 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, as well as the additional costs of marketing the movie and other miscellaneous costs that the studio pays above and beyond the production budget, we get an estimated mid-range break-even point of $137.5 million. Consequently, I'll have to say that Challengers is a bona fide box office flop. Opening in second place in this weekend's domestic box office was the low-budget family drama entitled Unsung Hero, which only earned $7.8 million domestically and no money internationally as of yet. But since its reported production budget is only $6 million, it should be able to break even. Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire clung to the number 3 position in this weekend's domestic box office by earning another $7.2 million to bring its current domestic box office total up to $181.7 million, making it the 3rd highest grossing movie domestically so far this year. In comparison with the other Godzilla franchise movies produced by Legendary Pictures and Warner Brothers, Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire is currently the 2nd highest grossing movie domestically for the franchise. Internationally, the movie earned another $24.1 million to bring its current international box office total up to $337.7 million. So globally, the movie earned another $34.2 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $519.4 million, making it only the 2nd movie to break $500 million so far this year, but also the 2nd highest grossing movie worldwide by surpassing the current global gross box office earnings of Fu Panda 4. So I'll say congratulations to Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire. Further, in terms of the Godzilla franchise movies produced by Legendary Pictures and Warner Brothers, Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire is currently the 3rd highest grossing movie worldwide within the franchise. Now, after being in the top spot at the domestic box office for 2 consecutive weekends, Alex Garland's dystopian action movie Civil War, with its moderately high production budget of $50 million, dropped to 4th place this weekend. Domestically, the movie earned another $7 million to bring its current domestic box office total up to $56.2 million. But the movie did get a bit of a boost by earning another $8 million internationally to give it a current international box office total of $11.3 million. So globally, the movie earned another $19.3 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $67.5 million. Dropping to 5th place overall in this weekend's domestic box office was the horror movie Abigail, which has a moderately sized production budget of $28 million. The movie earned another $5.3 million domestically to bring its current domestic box office total up to $18.8 million. Internationally, the movie has earned $9.8 million to date, which, when combined with its current domestic box office total, brings its current global gross box office total up to $28.6 million. Now, when I multiply the movie's $28 million production budget by 2.5, we get an estimated mid-range break-even point of $70 million. And as I said last week, unless the movie starts to bring in a lot more international box office, I don't expect it to break even, but I'm also not closely tracking it as I don't expect it to be in the top 5 movies at next weekend's domestic box office. In 7th place domestically this weekend was Kung Fu Panda 4, which earned another $3.6 million to bring its current domestic box office total up to $185 million, which is allowing it to remain as the second highest grossing movie domestically for 2024 to date, behind Dune Part 2. Internationally, the movie earned another $18.2 million to bring its current international box office total up to $318.5 million. So globally, the movie earned another $23.2 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $503.5 million, making it only the third movie so far this year to break $500 million globally and become the third highest grossing movie worldwide, behind Dune Part 2 and Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire. Remaining in 8th place domestically this weekend was Ghostbusters: Frozen Empire, which earned another $3.3 million to bring its current domestic box office total up to $107.4 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $7.4 million to bring its current international box office total up to $80.6 million. So globally, the movie earned another $11.8 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $188 million. And finally, in 9th place domestically this weekend was Dune Part 2, which earned another $2 million to bring its current domestic box office total up to $279.7 million, which maintains it as the highest grossing movie domestically for 2024 to date. Internationally, the movie earned another $5.3 million to bring its current international box office total up to $424.5 million. So globally, the movie earned another $8.5 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $704.2 million, which not only maintains Dune Part 2 as the highest grossing movie worldwide for 2024 to date, it's also the first movie of 2024 to break $700 million, which I said it would do this weekend in my box office roundup video that I had released last week. Going back to Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire, it reportedly had a production budget of $135 million, which, when we multiply by 2.5 and 3.0 respectively, we get an estimated break-even point ranging from $337.5 million to $405 million. So to project what the final domestic box office for Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire might be, I'll use a range of average weekly drops that are based on one standard deviation above and below the overall average weekly drop for the past 4 Warner Bros. Godzilla movies, which is 39.47%. And with a standard deviation of 6.58%, that creates a range from 32.89% to 46.05%. Using that range, I can project that the final domestic box office for Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire may range from $193.3 million at the low end, $196.9 million at the mid-range, and $201.9 million at the upper end, which is a slightly higher and more narrow projection than last week's, and indicates a small possibility that the movie could potentially become the franchise's highest grossing movie domestically if it can earn more than the $200.7 million that 2014's Godzilla movie earned domestically. To project what this movie's final global gross box office might be, I'll use the movie's current domestic share of 34.98%, which is slightly lower than last weekend's domestic share and is within one standard deviation of the previous 4 movies' average domestic share of 29.57%. So using the movie's current domestic share, I can project that the movie's final global gross box office may range from $552.7 million at the low end, $562.9 million at the mid-range, and $577.1 million at the upper end, which is a slightly higher but more narrow projected range than last week's. But with that mid-range projected final global gross box office value of $562.9 million, the movie could potentially become the franchise's highest grossing movie worldwide if it can surpass the $561.1 million that 2017's Kong Skull Island earned. At any rate, Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire, like Dune Part 2 and Kung Fu Panda 4, has already broken even, so all of the additional money that it's currently earning is counting directly towards the movie's profitability. Going back to Civil War, with a $50 million production budget, when multiplied by 2.5 and 3.0 respectively, we get an estimated break-even point ranging from $125 million to $150 million. Using a range of possible average weekly drops from 30 to 40%, I can project that this movie's final domestic box office may range from $73 million at the low end, $77 million at the mid-range, and $82.2 million at the upper end, which is a slightly lower projection than last week's. Given that there aren't that many foreign countries where Civil War is supposed to be released, and there appears to be very little interest in the movie outside of the US so far, the movie's current domestic share is lower than last week's, but is still rather high at 83.25%. So the projected final global gross box office for the movie isn't all that much better than the final domestic box office projections, with $87.7 million at the low end, $92.5 million at the mid-range, and $98.8 million at the upper end, which remains well below what this movie needs to break even, but is slightly higher overall than last week's projected range. Hence, unless the movie can obtain a lot more international interest and revenue, Civil War is going to flop. Going back to Kung Fu Panda 4, this is the fourth movie in a franchise that has a franchise average weekly drop of only 28.52%, which is somewhat low, and its standard deviation is only 0.49%, which is incredibly low. In order to project how well Kung Fu Panda 4 might do domestically, I decided to multiply that standard deviation by 10 so that I could create a broader possible range of average weekly drops from 23.66% to 33.38%. And using that range, I can project that the final domestic box office earnings for Kung Fu Panda 4 may range from $194.7 million at the low end, $196.9 million at the mid-range, and $199.8 million at the upper end, which is a barely higher but more narrow range than last week's projections. Currently, Kung Fu Panda 4 is the second highest grossing movie domestically for the Kung Fu Panda franchise, but its current final domestic box office projections show that it won't surpass the $215.4 million that the original Kung Fu Panda movie earned domestically in 2008. But the movie's domestic share did slightly drop again to 36.74%, so I can project that the movie's final global gross box office will probably range from $529.8 million at the low end, $536 million at the mid-range, and $543.9 million at the upper end, which is also a slightly higher but more narrow projection than last week. In terms of the overall Kung Fu Panda franchise, Kung Fu Panda 4 currently sits as the franchise's lowest grossing movie worldwide, but since 2016's Kung Fu Panda 3 earned $521.2 million in global gross box office revenue, the current projections for Kung Fu Panda 4 indicate that it will more than likely surpass that, ensuring that it won't be the franchise's lowest grossing movie worldwide. Given that Kung Fu Panda 4 has a production budget of only $85 million, when multiplied by 2.5, we get an estimated mid-range break-even point of only $212.5 million. Thus, like Dune Part 2 and Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire, Kung Fu Panda 4 has already broken even and made bank. Now going back to Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, this is the fifth movie within the Ghostbusters franchise, which began in 1984. With a production budget that's only $100 million, when multiplied by 2.5 and 3.0 respectively, we get an estimated break-even point ranging from $250 million to $300 million. As I had explained in last week's box office roundup video, while there are 4 previous Ghostbusters movies, the first one has such a low average weekly drop that it artificially lowers the franchise average weekly drop too much and also creates too large of a standard deviation to be useful. So instead, I'm using the past 3 Ghostbusters movies to create an adjusted franchise average weekly drop of 32.02% and a corresponding standard deviation of only 5.13%, which gives me a range of possible average weekly drops from 26.9% to 37.15%, which is a very reasonable range. And using that range in conjunction with the current domestic box office earnings for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, I can project that the final domestic box office earnings may range from $114.8 million at the low end, $116.7 million at the mid-range, and $119.1 million at the upper end, which is barely higher but more narrow overall than last week's projections. The movie's current domestic share dropped again to 57.12% from last week's 58.44%, which places it even further below the franchise's average domestic share of 63.46%, but still within one standard deviation. And when I use the movie's current domestic share of 57.12%, I can project that the final global gross box office for the movie may range from $201 million at the low end, $204.3 million at the mid-range, and $208.5 million at the upper end, which is a slightly higher but more narrow range than last week's projection that shows a much higher likelihood that the movie will at least be able to break $200 million. But Ghostbusters Frozen Empire is still a flop and will most likely lose as much as $41.5 million to $99 million in global gross box office revenue, which, when divided by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, means that the production companies behind it, which include Sony and Columbia Pictures, currently stand to lose anywhere from $20.7 million to $49.5 million. And finally, going back to Dune Part 2, which is the last movie that I'll be talking about in this video, using the same range of possible average weekly drops from 32.86% to 42.86%, as I had used in previous week's projections, my revised projections for the movie's final domestic box office earnings now range from $283.9 million at the low end, $284.8 million at the mid-range, and $285.9 million at the upper end, which is a very similar but more narrow range than last week's projected range. The movie's domestic share is nearly the same as last week's at 39.72%, which I can use to project that the movie's final global gross box office revenue will probably range from $714.6 million at the low end, $716.9 million at the mid-range, and $719.8 million at the upper end, which is a slightly higher but more narrow range than last week's projections. Given that Dune Part 2 has an estimated break-even point ranging from $475 million to $570 million, which is calculated by multiplying its $190 million production budget by 2.5 and 3.0 respectively, the movie has already made bank. Thus, while Ghostbusters Frozen Empire is a definite flop and Civil War is a likely flop, both Challengers and Abigail will be joining them in the flop column. But Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire, Dune Part 2, and Kung Fu Panda 4 are all highly successful and profitable. Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to everyone who has subscribed to our channel. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button, and please feel free to share a comment. If you'd like to help support this channel, please press the red subscribe button, and please press the bell to receive notifications for new content. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Twitter by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.